are a couple things that make Fakirs a really unique faction. So the first is that they fly around on carpets. So if you look at their book ability, they can carpet fly using a priest. You spend a priest to fly over a hex to another spot where either a yellow already exists that you build on, or you're digging and building at the same time. And when you do that, you get 4 points. Super interesting. And so that means priests are really important for them. The next really important thing to note about Fakirs is this big empty space. They can't do shipping. There's no way for them to increase shipping. They can't use the temporary shipping scroll. They can't use ship scoring. So that's kind of a bummer for them. And so if they want to be able to reach further than one, they have to take a particular town that's called the range town. That's also the +1 ship town. On the other side for Fakirs, it's a range town, and now they can fly over 2 hexes to do their carpet flight with a priest. So that's a bit of a bummer. They can also increase digs only once. They start with only 5 power in bowl 2 instead of usually 7. So now they're disadvantaged, and that means that it's a bit hard for them to get good power actions round 1. And then the other thing is their stronghold is insanely expensive. It takes 4 workers and 10 coins. So a lot of times you won't build the stronghold, but that's another way to increase your range. So the stronghold is 1 priest income every round, and you now can increase your range when you want to carpet fly. Usually Fakirs are on D3 and F3. There's some nice like single digs for them in that area. D3 is nice. You want mermaids on one or swarmlings there, and then you can carpet flight dig B2 to get to A5. That's why D3 is nice. F3 is great because it's in the middle. If you can get E6, then you can carpet flight to E8, right? And also you dig G2 and you can carpet flight to I7. So those are why those 2 spots are definitely the most common. Every once in a while you could do something strange, like starting on E8 and actually trying to round 1 carpet flight and get to E6. But yeah, D3, F3, definitely the most common for Fakirs. So looking at Claybo's opening slides here, you can see the only options listed, and I agree with this, is do you want to do temple and new dwellings, or do you want to open 2 temple? The other possibility is opening temple, putting a priest occult, like let's say you're on the priest scroll. You could open temple, don't build any new dwellings, put a priest to a cult to get something off of either air or fire, and then be the first to double dig round 2. That's something you can do with them. You could, ideally you're, able to get a little bit more than that down round 1. So you could, can you single dig, for example? And if you're on a priest, you could single dig over the water and get 2 new, dwellings down that way, either in the north or in the south. There's a way to single dig in that. So you could open temple 2 new dwellings. That can be good. You need a dig and a priest usually. Fakirs can almost never double dig because they have 5 power in bowl 2. The other opening that's good for them, that's listed here as super strong, is 2 temple. So if you're starting on the stronghold sanctuary scroll, that gives you the extra 2 workers you need to open 2 temple. 2 temple's appealing for Fakirs because they need priests so much because they use it for carpet flying, right? So they get, each of those priests can turn into expansion and points. And so being able to do double temple helps fuel that. The risk with double temple is that you might not have enough workers. So the question, like for round 2, like you want to make sure you're getting at least 2 dwellings down round 2 if you're going to open double temple. And so if you take like, earth 1, fire 1, or air 2 with your temples, now you only internally produce 1 worker. And so you need to find more workers somewhere to get more dwellings down round 2. Let's talk about what favors they take. So I think the most common favor for Fakirs is this air 2. They really like to be able to dig Even single digging is pretty good for them because it helps them expand. Whereas when you double dig, only one of the two digs is allowed to be a carpet flight, whereas the other one has to be one that's directly adjacent to your stuff. But Air 2 tends to be really attractive and flexible for them. Sometimes they'll go Earth 2 or Fire 1. I really don't like to go Earth 1 round 1 with them because they just are a little bit behind in production with only 5 power in bowl 2. It's just, and like they tend to have a hard time expanding round 1. But if you're opening 2 temple, now maybe you can make one of them Earth 1 and one of them, Earth 2 or something like that, or Fire 2, or Air 2 or Fire 1. So those are, things you can look out for. Other ideas, so they really like, dig scroll because then they don't have to stress about digs around none. They really like big buildings so they can open 2 temple. They like starting on priest. They can always put it to a cult potentially, but you can also use it to, if you can get single dig, you can use it to expand. And the other one that's kind of nice is there might be times where starting on 4 coins and a cult step would work well with taking either Air 2, or so you could go Temple Air 2, you have a native air step, and then you could use your bump to get to the 4th step of air for an air dig. Another example would be if you then take the worker's power action. Now you can open 2 temple. You could go Earth 1, Earth 2, bump Earth. Now you're at the 4th step of Earth to get an Earth dig. So those are ideas for how to play Fakirs in round 1. Fakirs really want to figure out how to get to their native yellows. So like let's assume you're on F3 and D3. So for 1, a lot of times you can't town in one of those 2 spots. Like ideally you can, but if you lose E6, or sometimes black will beat you to E2. But let's say let's say you lose E6, and so you can't town easily, and unlike nomads, you can't like sandstorm one of those 2 hexes, so it's really hard to town around just F3 and G2. A lot of times you just want to leave that, try to town in the west, and then try to do a second town in the north. So you usually want to get to B2 pretty fast. Sometimes round 1, probably round 2, you want to be getting to B2 and try to carve out that town as your second town. Maybe third town if you're really lucky, but probably just your second town. From there, it's a matter of figuring out, okay, so I've gotten this flight to B2 to get A5. At some point, I'll dig G2 and fly to I7. From there, I have to say, okay, I can't expand very easily via carpet flight. Maybe from A7, I can get to B4, but mostly it's going to need to be range. And so this is partly why towning quickly for Fakirs is really, really important. So they ideally like to town in like round 3 to get the plus range town. And now all of a sudden, I can go to B1. If I'm on, E2 or E3, I can reach H1. I can now fly to E8, even if I've lost E6. And from there, there's B4, there's G4, there's G7. And if I'm able to get, to either of these 2 hexes, I can also potentially access B6. So getting your range up in the mid game, usually through your town, so that you can start flying around with your priests is usually the way to go. The other thing you could consider is, can I figure out how to connect without needing to increase my range? And that's going to be really rare. The way one can do it potentially is if you get D4, E8, D6, and now you're connected through the north via 1, and then you could even dig D7 and get to B6. So Fakirs, you tend not to get cult points. Maybe you can win like fire or air. Just try to, if you could win 1 cult, that's great. And try to win network and carpet fly as much as you can. So ideally 2 towns, winning network, maybe a cult, and then carpet flying as much as possible to score those points. That's the way to play Fakirs. That should be the sort of go-to way to play Fakirs. Fakirs are a weak faction for sure. They have too many disadvantages, particularly starting with only 5 power in Bull 2, and the fact that they can't score with a ship scroll. That sometimes their expansion early is also really hard, so they're definitely one of the weakest factions. So the biggest swing factors for Fakir. So first is you absolutely do not want to see ship scoring in the game. That needs to be out of the game. That's no good. So no ship scoring allowed in the game with Fakirs to a lesser extent, but also temp shipping. They can't use either of those. So you don't want to see, especially ship scoring, but also temp ship. You don't want to see in the game. They really like seeing dig scroll because that's a carpet flight for them somewhere usually. They like seeing dwelling scoring, TP scoring in particular. They're okay with big building scoring, but it's not. They don't build their strongholds, so it's not a huge deal either way. But they often will do their sanctuary to get that range town, and so that can be fine. They really like seeing the priest in the game. That's on the margin better for them than it is for other factions. So in terms of opponents, so Fakirs are often on F3 and D3. So they don't want to see like Brown being in the game is definitely a concern, particularly cultists more than halflings. So if cultists are in, they almost always start on E6, and they tend to increase their shipping, which means they could start threatening E8 and B4 before Fakirs can get there. So I think cultists are pretty bad news for Fakirs. Fakirs also would like to be the only network faction. So like if you see the absence of like engineers or stronghold witches or alchemists, if you can see the absence of those, that means Fakirs have a decent chance of winning network. The other faction that I really don't like to see in is Darklings. So one reason is they will often start E5 and dig E6 before I can get there. So that's a bummer. They also could start C1 and race me to E2, bummer. Or, and this is a little bit the case for alchemists and darklings, is they can start C1 and on temporary shipping be digging B2 and B3. And that takes away one of my early carpet flights to B2 to get to A5. So now, like, they probably will dig A5 before I get there, but in general, it just curbs my early expansion. So that's pretty scary. The other one that alchemists, so darklings and alchemists can threaten B4 quite a bit. A lot of times they like to cut through this north. So that's, if you're losing easy access to the north in general, that can make expansion east pretty hard. So you can maybe get out of jail if you can get to 2 range and then fly to E8 and get to the east and start flying around as best you can. But those are definitely threats. I don't like, I think black is sneaky bad for Fakirs and cultists. Halflings are not quite as bad because often halflings may actually start double east. Not always, but sometimes they'll start double east, in which case Fakirs are a lot more playable. So, and even if they start in the middle here, they like to increase digs. They might not increase their shipping quite as fast. And so they might not beat you to the north. If it looks like a setup where halflings have to start middle on E6 and it looks like they're going to increase ship quickly, now all of a sudden halflings are a bigger concern as well. The red factions, not too bad, honestly. Giants might dig B4, but mostly they're not going to going to kill you. It might be a game against giants where you actually start E8 and F3 and protect E8 from giants and then try to carpet flight to D3 before them or something like that. But it's not the end of the world. And same with Chaos Magicians. Chaos Magicians might also threaten E8 and B4. But other than that, it's not too bad. You definitely want to see Mermaids on E4 or Swarmlings on D2. You really want to see blue faction in the game. That's really, really critical. To experiment a little, I actually really like to play Fakir's 2 temple opening, both with economic favors. where like Fire 1, Air 2 is one I'm playing right now, and that can be a fun thing to try to experiment with. Another idea is to try to increase digging and do a little bit of dig bombing at the end, where you carpet fly and 2-worker dig, just to rack up some points. You could, if you wanted to get a little kooky, try to play your stronghold in the mid game, even though it costs 10 coins. It's something you can try to squeeze in, and instead of taking the range town and try to play that way. But Fakirs are a lot of fun, and again, they're so weak that if you can be competitive with Fakirs at all, it's like already feels pretty spicy.